Hi, and welcome to the Mailbox, where I discuss some of the more interesting comments to have appeared on the channel from the last week, where we're going to be talking about, of course, the ongoing issues with BfA and looking ahead to the next expansion and future patches in BfA and Azerite and all the usual stuff like that. So first of all, what we tend to do is where's the mailbox? So last week's was in this location. I thought it was fairly straightforward actually, but most of you did not. We usually get about half a dozen people getting it right. We've got like two. Gromgar and Frostfire Ridge indeed. Although I'm not quite sure about Corox's comment. It says this one was a hard one. On top of the giant ogre skeleton at Gromgar and Frostfire Ridge zone that is proof that Blizzard has an alliance bias. You're going to have to explain that one. I thought it was a marvellous zone. What was the issue? Anyway, that was last week's. I have actually deliberately gone for one that I think might be a little bit more challenging this week. But we will see how you get on anyway. So what you need to do is to say, where is this mailbox? Which zone is it in, as well as which specific location within that zone, which is marked on the map. It's all nice and straightforward from that point of view. There are some clues in the background, so, you know, those who are familiar with Azeroth should be able to get it, but we will see, we will see. Right then, so, first little comment is not really Warcraft related. It says, did you film this in Orgrimmar because you look red? I will look different to how I've done previously. I have a new webcam. Basically what happened, people who watch my videos will know there's certain issues I have with the webcam that I previously was using, which is still there. It's just I'm not using it now. And you know, sometimes if I move back like that, I tend to move around. I don't really stand still, and it would keep going out of focus and things like that. And also, it's quite difficult to get the lighting because although it looks like I'm in a vast studio, I am not. I'm in a room, a little room. I've got my computer set up, and I've got lights either side of me to project the green screen. Very difficult to get a light in front of me because there's limited space without it being a big bright LED light that blinds me. So someone said sometime, it was like a year ago or something, oh, you should look at this Razer webcam. It's really good. It's got a little ring light around it. And I looked it up and it was not available in this country. And then on the other channel, people were saying things again about it. Oh, you should illuminate it from the front. To which point I was thinking, yes, I'm a physicist. I understand how lighting works, but it's very difficult. And I said to one person, look, I'm waiting for this webcam to become available in the UK and then it should be fine. And then I thought, hang on a minute, I hadn't checked for a little while. I checked and it was available, so I have it now. But there are different settings. I haven't played about with the settings yet. So this is one of the settings. Shall we have a little look at the other settings? This is another one, although there's something weird going on behind me there. I don't even know what that's about. So obviously that's a non-starter. Let's try another. And this is another. I'm not going to, and there's custom settings as well. I could change all sorts of things. I could be there for hours. But I'm not going to. I'm not even going to change it back to the original setting because oh dear, I've moved the camera now. Oh no, what have I done? I've done a thing. Oh no, it's fine. I'm just going to keep it like this. That'll teach you to open your big mouth. So let's get on to some actual questions. I'll change it later. On to some Warcraft questions. So it says, I don't get it. Why can't we get to loot and itemization like TBC? Like we already tested it. No, it works. Stop handing out gear like candy. Catch-up gear becomes regular. Gear started... Becoming regular. Gearing started as meme became real. The 10 million playing back then were not 10 million hardcore raiders. They were mostly casuals. They played the game without all this patronizing casual content. So the thing is, though... Although, yes, you can say that the current gearing situation is probably not good, you can't also say that, again, it's trying to link the fact that lots of players played it back then. And the reason they're not now is because things have changed. It's not really. Things had to change. If you'd have kept it like it was in TBC, this game would not be running now. You know, as you can see from games that tried to not change at all, they didn't stay popular. So... I mean, you know, some of those games still go because you don't need to make that much money to keep an MMO going. So they did have to change things, and if you look at players these days, PC gamers, any sort of gamers, they are much more into the casual mindset. You can see it with World of Warcraft itself in terms of the people who play World of Warcraft. You were basically casual. If you did 5 nights raiding a week in vanilla, your guild was pretty casual. You weren't going to be, one of the best ones. Whereas nowadays, that's ridiculous. There are some guilds that still do that, and it's absolute madness. 3 or 4 is much more usual. In fact, I would say in Legion, 3 or 4 is much more usual. I think it's even got in BfA to the point where 2 or 3 is much more common now. Even 4-night guilds are much less common than they were 2 years ago. And that's the serious players. That is the serious players. You can bet your ass the majority of the casual players actually want this casual content. And although, you've got now a much smaller number of people playing. I mean, this is just literally over the last few years. It was only a few years ago when there was still definitely about 7 million when we last knew what the subscriber numbers were. Which, and those players, again, were wanting casual content. I'm not saying wanted power gear thrown at them. I argue that we don't need everything to be the power gear. Blizzard just take this view that, right, we've got this content. People, want casual content. Therefore, we will just make the content we already have for serious players more casual and more accessible, instead of actually just coming up with content that is better suited to casual players. I'm not at all impressed with, as a casual player now, the content for casual players, because it's the same as the content I did for serious players, only more insulting. It's pathetic. It's really not worth, and I'd still have to put some effort into doing it. And it's not worth it because it's not suitable content for me. And the rewards are not... I mean, what good are the rewards? I don't need good gear to hang around in, like, Dazaralor or wherever the hell. I only remember that name now because of the name of the raid. I just used to call it the Pyramid before. I might still just call it the Pyramid. The Pyramid of many steps. Too many steps. So, yeah, it's... although, as I agree that it is poor trying to have a core set of content that everyone does from super casual to super hardcore, and you just sort of scale up the difficulties of it, nonetheless, that's not the reason. You can't say that the way it was done in TBC worked. It didn't, even at the time, it didn't. Things were criticised about it. But you certainly couldn't have kept it like that. You've got to move on with the times. But, that's not to say that they haven't made decisions that were poor. Then it says they either need to reboot WoW, perfect opportunity with Warcraft 3 remastered. No, it's not. Or make WoW Classic, with alternate content for it. Again, they're not going to do that. There's not enough people interested in it. I mean, I would say with WoW Classic, wait a year. I'm not going to say it's going to have hardly anyone playing. I don't believe that. We may not even know, actually, if you think about it. They may. I don't know. Blizzard won't actually reveal how many people are even playing WoW Classic unless it's in their interest to do so. And I actually don't know what would be in their interest to do so. Would they like the idea that lots of people are playing it after a year? Or would they prefer if it was just a modest number of people? Because you can well imagine if they can just say it's it's like 100,000 people playing it, then it's a bit like saying, yeah, it was worth bringing out because there's some people who like playing it. But in actual fact, it's exactly what we've been saying for years. The vast majority of people don't want that content anymore. Whereas if it's become super popular, they may not like the idea of releasing... Well, they wouldn't release how many people are playing actual WoW anyway, and they don't release the sub numbers. But people might start to imagine, if there's more people playing classic WoW than retail WoW, it's sort of backing up an argument that WoW has very much lost its way, that the WoW development team have anyway. So I don't think we'll ever find out. I don't think they'd reveal the numbers because it's the same reason they don't anymore reveal the number of subscribers. Because one, they don't have to. And two, it was just a stick to beat them up with. Because it made no difference whether the numbers were good or not. When they stopped doing it, as I say, the numbers were about 7 million something, weren't they? And... that's good. That's really good numbers. It's just not as good as it was. So every time they released the numbers, everyone just beat them up about it. It was like, being hit over the head. So they just stopped. But anyway. Next one, it says, WoW has class designers. I wonder what they do all day. If they only do class design, nothing else, they suck balls. Or they're really bad at getting changed into the actual game. No, to be fair, you've got to understand what a class designer has to do. First of all, Class designers have like about 3 specs each with which they're in charge of. The other thing is, they've first of all got to get a general view of what the issues are, and they do actually talk to some people. In fact, although I talk about communication between Blizzard and the general player base being absolutely god-awful, the area where there is some good communication is between the class design team and certain section of the player base. So they do actually listen. Now, obviously, with class designers, you get some good ones, you get some bad ones. You know, some who engage properly, some who, well, there's a system for engagement, but they're not really all that bothered. They have tried to do something recently where they've been trying to tackle questions that the community has as well. And the best way to get involved in those is via your class Discord, because Blizzard do engage with that. Very rarely directly, but indirectly. Now, what they've got to do, so let's say there's a particular issue that needs addressing. They have got to run through multiple things. First of all, there might be any number of solutions which can be applied to solve that problem. That's assuming they accept the problem. They've first of all got to accept that problem. Then when they accept it, they've got to come up with a range of possible solutions. And then you funnel it down to the ones that would actually solve the problem. But then you've got to consider the following things. Let's say this is a problem, you're solving a problem with that particular spec in a raid environment. You've got to make sure that you're not throwing out balance in, say, a dungeon environment or in an arena environment, you know, or battleground environment, or anything that involves, you know, serious play, and you don't want to give them an unfair advantage. That's quite complex. You know, already, if you imagine you've got 4 solutions and you've got to think about 5 different scenarios, you know, you're already talking about considering 20 things, and that's just for one issue. And you've got to discuss these things. You've got to discuss it with the community. You've got to discuss it with other designers, the class design team, the senior class designer, potentially higher up as well. And then, you know, when they're working all this through, so it takes a lot of time, you've then got to make sure you're coming up with models. You need to build a suitable model to be able to test it out. You can't just think, you know, some people are just mad. They go, oh, this ability is too weak. Why don't they just double the damage it does? You know, because it interacts with other things, and then you can end up doing 10 times the damage just because of doubling the damage of this thing. You know, and people don't appreciate this because they just see a thing instead of the whole model. So you need to model it. You need to be able to say, well, how is it going to work? So that's modifying simulations, things like that. And then, even though these class designers may well be planning something, they're working things through, getting test results, checking that it would be okay, you know, liaising with other people who can also check it out. Every now and then, the senior designers throw another philosophy on top of them. You know, the classic case was during the alpha with the uptime quota. You know, and Blizzard publicly even said this. This wasn't just something that I happen to know about. You know, they were saying, oh, you know, these specs, because Ret Paladin is one of them, that are always using abilities. Well, they're always concentrating on their abilities. So they're not really looking at the marvellous architecture of this room that this boss is in. We need them to be able to stop and smell the roses. So they wanted to slow down everyone's rotation. So you always had downtime. Now, there's certain advantages to downtime, don't get me wrong. But that was their reason, so you could look around. Oh, isn't this marvellous? I mean, you do anyway. I mean, that's the thing that they're completely missing. Once you get good at a class, you do look at, you don't stare at your buttons all day. You are looking around. But anyway, never mind that. That's what they said. So then the class designers had to work to that. And to make sure, and every time you change an ability or the way it works, of course, you could be affecting that uptime. So you've got to recalculate it and make changes. It might mean you can't make that change after all, just because of that stupid philosophy. And then what happened was, you know, they started to ease back on it. So they started to change that quota. And of course, that throws everything out of whack again, because all of a sudden now you're working to different parameters. And that was just one of the things. You know, you also had the GCD changes. Imagine how much time was lost there. That was all very much involving class design. Yeah, the whole thing's a complete mess. So yeah, there are class designers, and they do spend all day working on class design. But the amount of time it takes just to consider one thing for one spec, and remember they've got multiple specs each designer, is immense, and the amount of coordination they need to before they're allowed to push any changes at all is absolutely immense. So you know, that's the reason there. The class designers are not bad. Some of them may be, but you know, they are given a very, very difficult task. Next one, it says, Azerite has been the biggest issue of this expansion. I think they will get it right eventually, and when they do, they should just let it continue into the next expansion. Same with classes. They screwed up with the GCD debacle, and presumably we wouldn't keep our artifact talents rather than that we would. I'm quite happy with my spec at the moment, but I know others are less so. However, from now on into the next expansion, they should just iterate as needed, but don't overhaul them again. A lot of other complaints are just misguided philosophy and don't cost any money to put right, like bringing back Master Loot for raiders. Well, quite. I think the big new feature for next expansion should be around the professions, give them depth and meaningful rewards. Warfronts and islands are pointless. Maybe the upcoming heroic warfronts requiring group coordination could save that content, but otherwise drop them and spend the money elsewhere. Now, so the idea, of course, of getting Azerite into a position where it does sort of work later on, I don't think they'll get it right eventually. I think it's not because they're incompetent. I think it's impossible to get it right, because you've got to consider this: Azerite traits. First of all, you're talking about a massive series of traits, each of which improves your capacity to do something: tanking, healing, DPS, whatever. And there's a lot of them. But you don't get all of them. Unlike the artifact weapon system, you don't get all of them. You have some of them. They're impossible to balance. Quite impossible to balance, that many. Which means some of them are going to be better. Even if it's like these three would be better for this situation, you know, let's say a single target raid boss. These ones would be better for a raid boss where there's a lot more movement. These ones would be better for sort of AoE, dungeons, that sort of thing. These ones would be better for, you know, there's different types of content. I'm not saying it's always going to be the same few traits that are always the best. But in a given scenario, there are going to be some that are the clear winners. But you can't have them all. So then you think to yourself, well, that's okay. In theory, that's okay. Just get those traits and it's all fine. Because that's what they'll balance around anyway. When they're balancing classes, they will balance around the fact that people have those best things. Because you can't balance around a lower point, because then the people who do get those best things will be overpowered. The problem there is, it's not as simple as that, is it? You can't just get the traits you want. Even with the residuum system now, it doesn't mean to say you can just get those. You know, some people will be lucky and get them earlier on, some people won't. And during the period of, say, raid progress, getting those best traits makes a massive difference to your DPS, which has two knock-on effects. First of all, a knock-on effect on the guild if a significant number of their raiders is unable to get those ideal traits, but another guild in exactly the same position is. And for you personally, in terms of your raid spot, if you can't compete because you're not able to get those really good ones, well, you're struggling. So it's from that point of view, completely impossible to get it right. Now, the system, the Azerite system, say from a casual player's point of view, rather than a min-maxer's point of view, they are improving. There's no doubt about that. I'll absolutely, be happy to say that they are improving it. And it may be that a lot of people, casual people, are happy with the end result. So then we come on to the other issue. Oh, and then they should just leave that into the next expansion. Well, they're not going to. We know, although they haven't specifically said, like with Legion, they did specifically say, I need to move this up. They did, oh, it's really tricky. They did specifically say that we wouldn't be keeping our artifact weapons. They said that right from the launch of Legion. There was no, even though throughout the alpha and stuff, I wondered, they made it clear when it launched. No. In fact, it was a little bit before it launched. You're not keeping them. This is just for this expansion. Now, they haven't said that with BfA. So some people may be thinking, Azerite might be in the next expansion. I can't say 100% that it definitely isn't. But remember, they have just said recently that tier armor may make a return. Now, if tier armor makes a return, that obviously means that Azerite armor has to disappear. Of course, it doesn't mean to say they shelve the entire Azerite system. They may just keep the neck and have that neck be like the artifact weapon system. So instead of a whole load of traits that we have to try and locate, maybe they just create a traits tree like the artifact weapon system, and maybe that will be fine, and maybe people will be happy with that. I would be happy with that. And it'll all be okay. They still get to keep the artifact power system, which I still believe they think does its job of keeping people playing. I don't agree, but they think it does. And that's maybe how it goes. But I would be absolutely amazed if the artifact system that we have by the end of BfA is what carries on into the next expansion. I'd be stunned by that. I really don't believe it. And it's the same with classes. Yes, they should just get classes in a good place and then leave them and only, tune them, of course, but only come back to redesign them when the game has moved on or when there's an issue identified. Other than that, they shouldn't keep... And I know they keep saying things like, oh, and there's not going to be a big redesign of classes this expansion. They always say that, but there always is. It's just that some expansions is bigger than others. So relatively, they may be saying, oh, it's not going to get much of a one this particular expansion. But it always gets a redesign every expansion. They monkey with all of the classes and specs. And they shouldn't. Get them working. So instead of giving yourself, 8 months to do class design? The period of... Because the class designers don't start, remember, until because they're the ones who are on the live version of the game. So class designers didn't start proper work on BfA until they brought out the last bit of serious content for Legion. Same will apply for the next expansion. So, but they will. They'll redesign it. It may be, in their opinion, relatively minor, but it will be a proper redesign. They always do it. They can't help themselves. And as you say, then that sort of, if they just did that, if they just got certain features working and then just gave them a light touch, that would free up designers to work on other things, the new content. Because you can absolutely do that. Don't imagine you've got this class design team that have done nothing but class design all their designing life. That's not true at all. The guy who does the Ret Paladin, the Frost Mage, and can't remember what else. He was a Diablo designer. He was doing Diablo development and then came out. And then he came up to World of Warcraft and did something else in Legion. I've forgotten what. And now he's on class design. So they do move around between teams anyway. So it's not, you could make the class design team smaller when it's all sort of working, and then get them working on other things. And then if there needed to be an overhaul, then you bring people off the other things to put them back on that. But they don't do these things. They don't do it. It's annoying. The real question, will Blizzard ever figure out player housing? No. They've nailed their colours to the mast on player housing. They're not doing it. Now, and I don't think they now can. If they change their minds, I believe that they cannot do it. Because they need a team. I said this recently. They would need a team because player housing it's not in the game at all in any way, shape or form. Some of the technology that would help you do it, yes, but the player housing itself, no. And if anyone mentions garrisons, I'm going to send Murlocs after them. Now, so it would take a development team. That would cost a lot of money. They're not going to get that lot of money. In fact, they're losing money. So no. They will never put player housing in this game now. That's just all there is to it. Because it would require a significant investment to do so, which I believe would be totally worth it. Absolutely worth it. You only have to look at other games to see the engagement that people put into them. But no, they won't. So sorry, it's gone. Forget it. Right, 3 things here. It says, in my opinion, BfA so far has been bad due to these 3 main issues. So we'll take them one at a time. 1. Bad class design. Some are good, most are okay, but several just make me want to cry when I try and play them compared to where they've been in the past. The GCD change didn't help on this front. The issues, I've obviously talked about class design and the difficulties the designers have. But yeah, the problem is when Blizzard throw in changing parameters. It's all right if at the start of the process they say, right, these are the parameters you must stick to. And we can agree or disagree with those parameters, but they'll at least be there. You at least give the class designers time to plan. Because all planning, whenever anyone has to do any sort of planning for the next year, something like that, then you're working to parameters. If those parameters suddenly change halfway through, that throws you completely off. It may completely invalidate what you've been doing so far. And that happened a lot. That happened several times through the BfA development process. And the other thing, of course, is class design is so crucial that they can't afford to mess it up. And yet they keep doing it. Because, I've said this before, not everyone raids. Not everyone does dungeons. Not everyone does arenas. Not everyone does battlegrounds. There's no content that everyone does. But what everyone does do that plays World of Warcraft is they play a class. They use that class. They become familiar with its abilities. And that's why that's the thing that is the most important. It's also the most difficult to get right, and requires the very best coordination and leadership. But it doesn't have that. That's the problem. 2, Azerite gear could have been this interesting thing, but instead we got something that makes you feel like your character is regressing as your gear improves until you refarm what you've already unlocked. Now, quite apart from what I've already said about the unbalanceable nature of the Azerite, yes, this is another big problem, and this is a problem that affects everyone. You get a new piece of gear, which might be an identical piece of gear, but higher item level, but you can't unlock the same traits. So then some people will be thinking, is it even an upgrade? There's nothing in game that will tell you that. You can only sim it, which is at least a lot easier now. At least we have that with raid bots. But only raid bots, mind you, nothing else. Unless you actually want to use the bare bones of simulation crafting, in which case feel free, but raid bots is much easier. Yeah, I can't I would say that there are more than those 3 issues, but I can't disagree with this issue because this feels bad to everyone. The idea that you get a higher item level piece of gear, quite a bit higher item level sometimes, and it's a downgrade either because you can't unlock all those traits or because it has the wrong traits. And then 3, failure to iterate on the improvements of Legion. Blizzard failed to take the improvements of Legion and add more flavour on them for BfA. Mainly World Quests and Legendaries are the ones you see. The Legendaries, I welcome the fact that they have been kicked into the dirt. There may be an Amanthal's Vision type Legendary at the end of the expansion. They haven't ruled that out. The Legendary system was a terrible, terrible thing. It was well, actually, no. Okay, hold on. If they did what they did at the end of the expansion and allowed you to gather some currency where you could then get one, preferably the one you actually wanted rather than a random one, but that would have been better, but it would still be poor. It would still be bad. So, no, I don't miss that. But the idea of, yes, saying, right, these things worked in in Legion, or in any expansion, so they're staying in the game. At first glance, you can sort of think, yeah, because Mythic plus Dungeons are in and they're still in the game. And, they have changed them, but they've not made them worse. I'm the jury, in my mind, the jury's still out as to whether they've made improvements in BfA or not. They definitely made improvements. Comparing the end of Legion to the start of Legion, definitely Mythic plus Dungeons got better there. Whether they've got better in BfA, I'm not sure about. I'm not saying they haven't, but I'm not saying they have either. It's sort of neutral at the moment with me. But that's pretty much it in terms of the popular content. That's pretty much all we're still left with. There isn't really anything else that came in Legion. So yeah, there are things in Legion that were popular that they haven't retained. Including, if they're going to have artifacts, how they do that artifact system, because they did completely change it. So yeah, and again, I've said this before, when you completely have to you're basically redesigning a whole new game every expansion. When you take it upon yourself to do that, you are inevitably not going to have it in a good state when it launches. BfA was inevitable in many levels just because of their approach to it. Anyway, it says BfA had promise and could have been saved, but to me it feels like we're about to have another WOD where they had bought the expansion halfway through to free up resources to make the next one better. I don't actually believe they're going to do that. I think they'd be in real trouble if they did that. They've already, in fact, I know that they're not going to, because they'd have surely already had to have made that decision. Because in a year's time, remember, it's going to be over. We're still going to be in BfA, but the content's done and dusted in 1 year from now. So they would have to be making that decision now, but they have, again, in that recent Q&A, already, or is it in the interview? He's done a few things recently. They were basically promising a lot more content. They said, you know, look at Legion, there was a lot more, at this point, there was a lot more content to come, and they're still going to be in BfA. So they basically, again, nailed their colours to the mast there. They're not going to chop content, you know. Certainly not in a way that's going to be discernible to us. So I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're coming up with another solution, which may or may not be the right solution. We shall see. Next one, it says, I haven't lost all hope for BfA. Good, good, good. It says, I'm hopeful 8.2 will be good and that BfA can end on a good note. As for the next expansion, I hope the lore is more inspiring. I'm hoping for a lot more lore on Bolvar the Lich King in the future. I also don't think the next expansion will be a lot better, but in your opinion, it'll be probably be more interesting. So, I am hopeful 8.2 will be good. Apart from anything else, 8.2 is going to... Well, 8.1... Well, sort of... 8.1.5 is going to start the story I'm really interested in. 8.2 is going to be the one where it really goes off. And it could well be that BfA ends on a good note. I am not disputing that. My issue becomes that what if I perceive a cycle whereby the expansion is very poor at the start and really shouldn't have been launched in that state, gets better, ends up promising. But then instead of carrying that on into the next expansion, they are starting again with their complete teardown of the whole game and rebuilding from scratch. In which case you get this whole hideous cycle beginning again. Except they can't afford it. They can't afford it. Look at the damage this did to BfA. They can't afford to do that again for the next expansion. But surely they're already committed along certain lines, because there's a lot of the basic premise of the next expansion will have already been developed. So obviously they haven't said anything publicly yet, but it's already been developed because people are working on it. They're committed to it, and that's in a way the problem. There's nothing you can do about it, but that's in a way the problem with having worked out what you're going to do in an expansion before the previous one launches. So there might be certain aspects of the expansion that's going to launch that you think are going to be amazing, and then you're committed to it. I think Order Halls is an example of this, you know, because Order Halls are very similar to garrisons, only they're not personal. And obviously they'd committed themselves to the Order Hall system in Legion before BfA came out. Now, BfA came out and it was very unpopular. Not necessarily instantly from the start, but it certainly was not a popular feature. But by the time it became apparent it was not popular, they were already committed on Legion. They're already working on Legion, been working on it for a while. So I think they just made a couple of quick tweaks. I don't think that Light's Hope Chapel was intended to be a wash with High Lords. I think there was just supposed to be one in there. But there it was. I think that was a quick change they made just to cover that one. And in BfA, of course, we don't have any such system. Nothing even remotely using that same technology. So, you know, so for the expansion, and that's the thing, when a feature they think is going to be popular becomes unpopular, it's 2 expansions down the line before it disappears. So, yeah, and this puts them in a very difficult position, because then, in some ways, I still stand by the fact that they don't learn from certain mistakes. But in some ways, also, I have to be fair to them, they may be perceived as not learning from a mistake, because it's like, well, this was a big mistake in this expansion, and you've done it in the next expansion. Well, if they didn't realise it was a big mistake until they'd already committed to it in the next one, well, they're stuck. They're a bit stuck. All they can try and do is make some changes. But those changes tend to be fairly knee-jerk, and they end up causing more problems. But I am also looking forward to Bolvar stuff in the next expansion, and I'm quite sure he's going to be a big part of it. He may even pop up in this expansion. Just like in Legion, when we had the Void Elf story with Illyria, you know, which had nothing to do with Legion, really. You know, but it's for this expansion. It's still not there yet. It's still a slow burner, but it's going to be there. It's going to be a bit of a firecracker. They could well do the same with Bolvar. You know, obviously they're already starting to nudge into that direction with Talia. So yeah. Next one. This is a very valid point. So it says, seems to me that we're getting these bad expansions every time they fool around with the squish of our health, power, item level, etc. It happened in WoD, then came out, no squish, things were pretty much fine. BfA, Legion, sorry. BfA then do a massive squish and once again things turn to sewage. They need to work on a way for the game to handle the massive numbers generated or to not scale things so high every other expansion. No reason we need to go from eye level 500 at the end of one to 750 at the beginning of the next one. As for if I think next one will be worse, if they don't try and rush it out with the August release like they did with Legion BfA and time for late September, middle of October release, they might be able to pull it off. Honestly, I prefer an extra month or two of draft. It says draft actually, but never mind, I'm not going to be mean. End of BfA and beginning of Revenge of the Potato People if it meant we were getting a finished game. All right, so a few things to unpick there. First of all, I think it's definitely valid to suggest that when they're making massive technological changes to the game, that is bound to distract the senior developers, as well as maybe some others that are actually working on that, because it affects things. So I think there's some argument there, definitely. That being said, it has to be done. There is no, we just have to manage with the bigger numbers. It's not realistic. So that is a difficult one. Inevitably, it is going to draw their attention away from certain things because it's not going to go right first time. It's like anything, isn't it? I mean, any electronics student will know this. It takes next to no time to design and build a circuit. The vast majority of the time is taking troubleshooting, finding out where all the problems are, because there will always be problems. I suppose the same thing, well, I know the same thing is true of programming. So that's the issue. Debugging is always the big issue. So I don't think there's a lot that can be done about that. But it is the thing I already cited as when I was talking about the fact that I don't think the next expansion is in good shape. The one ray of hope I gave was that in this expansion, there were technological features that were distracting the senior developers at least. In the next expansion, if there isn't an equivalent one, then they may be able to accomplish more, even with a reduced budget. Now, as for an extra bit of drought, which, yes, anyone would say, if you release it in a ready state, we will accept another couple of months of nothing. Because for a lot of people, they'll just unsubscribe anyway and play something else. I'd be delighted over summer. Yeah, play something. I mean, I'll still be playing the beta if I'm in the beta. But I would play something else. I'd be more than happy for that to happen. But I don't think it will. Because the later they release it, the later it is before they can get their money. And I know they get the bulk of their money from the pre-orders, but they can't get the money from the pre-orders until they've announced at least a release date for at the latest. And as soon as you announce that, you're committing that development team. So if they run into unexpected trouble, they have no leeway. I mean, I know, yes, they could have announced the release date of the 21st of September rather than, mid-August. It was mid-August, yeah. So they could have had themselves another month, which would have helped a lot. But again, before they knew when they'd be ready, and it was out of their hands, I don't believe the development team announced this, they committed themselves. And this is why before Legion, they used to give 2 months' notice of the release date because they didn't announce the release date until they were ready. That 2 months was just logistics of getting the game out there, which used to include shipping out physical copies. Now much less so. But now they're giving 4 months' notice. There is no reason to give 4 months' notice at all. They can't possibly know that they'll be ready within 4 months. The reason they're doing it, of course, is so they can start the hype train and get lots of people buying it and playing it. And as soon as, because I don't know how many pre-orders they sold before the definite release date was announced, but it may well be that a lot of them starts to buy those pre-orders when you give the definitive release date. So yeah, I don't see it at all. Don't see it. They want to they're doing what every games company is doing. Whether there'll be a change to the attitude of the general games company in this industry in this regard, I don't know, because quite a few companies, studios have been burnt by releasing these unfinished games. But we'll have to see. The only way Blizzard would change from it, I think, though, is if the next time they announced a pre-order, that a lot of people just didn't buy the pre-order. That's the only way you'll change their way of working on that. Next one, it says, Law already dead when Holy Discipline Forsaken and Lightforged Draenei Shadow Priest and Void Elf Holy Discipline and Monk Tauren. And they didn't allow for Draenei to become rogues. Hang on a minute. Monk Tauren. Of all the class race combinations you could think of to pick on, a Tauren monk was top of the list. There is another type of monk that is far more abominable, I have to say. You don't fancy mentioning that? No? Okay then. And they didn't allow for Draenei to become rogues. Meanwhile, they allow it for Fat Culturists. And they didn't allow Monk for Lightforged Draenei, even though they use life magic to protect life, so it's not law breaking, but they allow it for Draenei. There is so much law butchered since the vanilla release. Now, first of all, you're specifically talking about class race combinations on this aspect of the law. I would say that the way Warcraft have butchered their law is with retconning. In other words, trampling over their own established law. Because when something like that happens, people can have no respect for it because you don't have respect for it yourself if you keep trampling all over it, ripping it down, changing it completely. And also people don't know where they are. People like to speculate on the law, but you do it by piecing together what's come before and trying to work out a trajectory. When you know that, it could change direction at any time and completely double back on itself, you can't really do that. You try anyway, it's still fun, but you know you can't do it. But in terms of class, race combinations, I mean, World of Warcraft, I'm not going to say is unique, but it is pretty unusual in having these restrictions these days. In role-playing games, and I say these days as if, there's been role-playing games from Dungeons and Dragons and so on, where, the race and the class are largely two different things, even when they have an effect on it. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons know how to treat names, for example. They're annoying, they're established as being annoying, and they're weak. So you don't really have a gnome warrior because that'd be laughable. But sometimes you do, but that's just madmen. So World of Warcraft with its restrictions on class race combinations so it's difficult to say out of touch because Dungeons and Dragons didn't have such severe restrictions either. But it's not in place. It's you don't get it. You don't get it in a lot of games. And when you do get it, you don't get it as restrictive as it is in WoW. And remember, WoW has actually, you've been talking about yourself, they've been easing it. But you've been easing it as if this is a problem for the law. There is no reason, and I get the idea of Lightforged Draenei and Shadow Priest. Okay, yes, that is one that you'd think to yourself, But my solution to that would be not to not allow them to play a priest. My solution would be that they don't play a Shadow Priest. They have the Shadow Priest kit, but they just change the names of the spells, change the look of it, so that it's actually holy magic they're using and not shadow magic. That would be an easy fix there. That doesn't stop that. The idea of Holy Discipline Forsaken is not an issue. I see no issue with law past, present, or I can't see law in the future, obviously. Oh, no, actually, that's a lie. I've speculated what's going to happen in the next year. But anyway, specifically in the past, I don't see anything in Warcraft law, even the stuff that's since been retconned, that prevents a Holy or Discipline Forsaken. Apart from anything else, even that was around in vanilla. So, we had that in vanilla. I just think it is restrictive. And I know everyone's waiting me for to say, because I'm not going to say it, that actually they should just allow any race class combination and leave it at that. Obviously, that's not going to come ever out of my lips, in all seriousness, because there is one race class combination that I will never, ever support. But beyond that, the rest of them should be okay. Sort of. Well, at least the ones that aren't already in existence. There are a couple in existence that maybe shouldn't. So, next one. Sad one. So, sadly, my whole guild is done, and we had a poll where 80% of around 60 people didn't want to return, so about 48 people. Sad times, looks like we wait for next expansion. At least I can look at screenshots of my 5 million long boy. I mean, this is quite sad. This is, again, something that I don't think Blizzard pay enough attention to. I've already talked about the fact before that when you don't put serious effort into recruiting new players, and the fact that the new player experience has not been kept up to date from expansion to expansion is testimony to that. You also need to try and retain more, and there is always and I've seen this many times, when a guild disbands, when it collapses, doesn't matter what sort of guild it is, there will always be those. I mean, some people will, of course, it'll disband presumably because there's not enough numbers anyway, but some will disband and go elsewhere. But some of them won't. They'll just quit the game, and the reason is that you get a situation where quite a lot, and I've seen this, by the way, ever since vanilla. You've got these players that were playing for the people that were in that guild. Some of them had already sort of gone off World of Warcraft a bit. It's not that they completely hated it, but what kept them in was that social contact with other people. And it's not like they want to go through the effort of finding another guild, even a casual guild, which might be relatively easier. They don't want to go through that and build up those relationships again. It's like they're gone. There's no longer any point in me to play. So there will be people who will just quit the game that wouldn't have quit the game if that guild had stayed there. So Blizzard not only lose players because players are not satisfied with the game, and there comes a point where the enjoyment they're getting out of it is less than the effort and money they have to put into it. You've also got people then, when they quit and it causes a social group to disintegrate, then some of the people remaining who would have played had it remained then won't. So you lose even more. And that's the issue with it. And this will be a classic example. I'm quite sure that, I mean, you've got 80% straight away not wanting to return. The other 12 of them, I'll bet you some of those don't just go elsewhere. Even the ones who voted to stay, well, when it comes down to it, if the guild is going to disband, would also quit the game. And some of them may return the next expansion. I'll bet some don't. And then it'll be the same thing. A month or two in, it'll be like, well, it's still not addressed the issues. We'll stop playing again. You'll have just basically paid for a game, the full price for a game that you've played for a month. And then the same thing happens again. But anyway, there we go. Right, on to the last one. So, it says, in the next expansion, we're getting new enemies. They'll be called new gods. They're old gods, but they're new ones made by the Void to continue expansion production. Can you imagine? I had to put this comment in because I just had this in my head. Can you imagine the greatest heroes of Azeroth? Defeat and Zoth. The old god threat to Azeroth has been ended. That's it. There aren't any more old gods. No more risk of Azeroth becoming corrupted. So Azeroth is now free to develop and be born sort of into this ultimate titan. Isn't it marvellous? And as you're looking across the landscape of Azeroth thinking, we might not be friends with each other, but we've at least saved Azeroth. Out of the sky comes a new old god, and you just look at it, and you just go, oh, for the love of puppies. Thousands of years, tens of thousands of years it took us to clear up the last lot. Now there's more of them. I don't know. It would be like, I imagine, doing a really good job of tidying your house, like really thorough, deep clean. And then an earthquake rips right through it. But there we go. That's the last one. I hope you enjoyed the mailbox this week. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. Subscribe for further content. Comment down below on anything you wish to comment about. And share with other people who might also be interested. Remember, there is a poll up for tomorrow's discussion video. And the Azeroth review, of course, will be on Tuesday, as usual. So until next time, I'll see you later.